That's super cool. My buddy did that the other year. I was like, it's awesome. Yeah, she's on her way. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting for Monday, January 8th, 2018. My name is Mark Farrell. I'll be chairing this committee. I am joined by our committee vice chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, as well as Supervisor Katie Tang. I want to thank Elisa Samara, the clerk of our committee, as well as Jim Smith and Samuel Williams from SF Gov TV for covering the meeting today. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the January 23rd, 2018 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 1?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to revise the definition of gross floor area to delete references, make exemptions, remove redundancies, and modify provisions, and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, we have our planning department here to speak on item 1.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Audrey Beckus with Planning Department staff. The proposed ordinance before you today would amend the planning code to make minor but substantive amendments and corrective amendments to the definition of gross floor area. The department has not received any public comment, and on September 7th, 2017, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve the proposed ordinance. The two substantive amendments could impact how gross floor area is calculated in the planning code. However, the impact would be minor. The first substantive amendment would remove the distinction exempting accessory buildings in C3 districts from the definition of gross floor area. C3 districts are currently exempt from including accessory buildings in a project's calculation of gross floor area. The provision is problematic for 3 reasons. The planning code does not define accessory buildings. The natural composition of most parcels in C3 districts prevents what could be interpreted to be an accessory building from being constructed, and all other zoning districts, including these types of accessory spaces in the definition of gross floor area, are included in the definition of gross floor area. Therefore, there is no distinctive characteristic of a C3 district that would differentiate it from all other zoning districts for the purposes of calculating gross floor areas of what we can presume to be defined as accessory structures. The second substantive amendment would remove the car share parking requirement from the definition of gross floor area. Required car share parking is a mandatory condition imposed by the city in order to increase residents' sustainable transportation opportunities. Required car share parking spaces are mandated for projects that meet certain conditions and are considered a transportation benefit to the community. Therefore, it is of a benefit to the public and the development community to exclude required car share parking spaces from the definition of gross floor area in all zoning districts. And this concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Supervisor Peskin? No? Okay, we will open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 1? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, can I have a motion to move this item forward?
I would be happy to make a motion to move this item forward with recommendation.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Peskin. We have a second by Supervisor Tang. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 2?
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code, Article 8, to correct errors, clarify nighttime entertainment restrictions, and update inclusionary affordable housing requirements and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you. Same thing, Planning Department. Speak on item 2.
Thank you. Again, Audrey Beckus with the Planning Department staff. The proposed ordinance would amend the planning code to correct several errors and make clarifying amendments to Article 8. The department has not received any public comment, and on September 7th, 2017, the Planning Commission voted unanimously to approve the proposed ordinance. Due to multiple revisions of some planning code sections, over time, text has been dropped inadvertently, spelling errors have arisen, and amendments made by one ordinance are not reflected in subsequent legislation. This legislation is intended to correct accumulated errors in the code and to update some sections where needed. And this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Colleagues, could I have a motion?
I'll make a motion then to send forth item 2 to the full board with positive recommendation.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang, second by Supervisor Peskin.
Just to make Aaron Starr happy.
Duly noted, just to make Aaron Starr happy, and we can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, could we call item number 3, please?
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to prohibit non-retail professional services, limit lot mergers, and allow arts activities and catering within the Mission Street NCT and making appropriate findings.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, board members. Claudia Flores, Planning Department staff. Just for a little bit of background on this legislation, this is part of the many strategies identified in the Mission Action Plan 2020, which was endorsed by the Planning Commission and transmitted to the board last March. Up on this slide will be, momentarily, the goal of MAP 2020 and the categories under which the strategies in the plan fall. Everything from tenant protections to economic development to advance the targets, goal, and objectives of the plan. Most of the strategies are already being implemented. This is the second MAP 2020 legislation you have seen in the last year, and we will have a bigger legislative package related to alcohol, restaurant, and PDR controls in the mission later this year, which is related to the Entering Control Supervisor Ronan introduced that is next on your agenda today. So I will now pass it to my colleague Pedro Peterson, and I'm available if you have questions about the broader MAP 2020 process.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Pedro Peterson, staff at Citywide Planning. Just to give you a little bit of background about the specific amendments that we're proposing today, they are aimed at, well, they come out of the MAP 2020 process, as Claudia mentioned, and they are aimed at curbing business-to-business uses on Mission Street and maintaining the retail commercial character of the corridor. They are aimed at easing land use pressures on retail businesses on Mission Street, expanding options for arts activities and catering uses within the NCT that are compatible with neighborhood commercial uses, protecting the fine-grained pedestrian orientation of Mission Street while also continuing to provide space for projects with a high percentage of BMR units. So the specific amendments that we are proposing today include the removal of non-retail professional services as a permitted use. These are formerly known as administrative services. Permitting arts activities and catering on all floors, limiting lot mergers in the Mission NCT on parcels fronting Mission Street in the Mission NCT to 100 linear feet of street frontages. And then for projects with frontages between 50 and 100 feet, the projects would require a commercial space that is less than 2,500 square feet. So they would have to break up these larger ground floor spaces into multiple spaces, including one that is smaller. And so just on this last issue of the lot merger issues, this is probably the one of these amendments that we've had the most back and forth on. We originally had proposed a 150-foot limit. Folks in the community requested a 50-foot limit, and we kind of sort of ended up at this 100-foot limit. And the idea behind this is essentially to maintain the pedestrian orientation, have a limit on lot mergers, but then also not discourage projects that might provide a higher percentage of BMR. So we looked at the soft sites that were that were adjacent to each other in parcels in the Mission NCT that were under common ownership, and we saw that if we did the 100-foot limit, we would get, and all those parcels were developed to their full capacity, we would get about 105 units, 25% of which would be below market rate. If these parcels were developed individually, you'd get a lot more sort of smaller projects that would come in below the 25-unit threshold for 25% inclusionary, so we would end up with fewer BMR units, which is why we ended up with this 100-foot limit. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions about any of these amendments. Thank you.
Colleagues, any questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. I do have a speaker card for item 3, Mark Loper. And if there's anybody else, please feel free to come forward. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Mark Loper, Ruben, Junius, and Rose. I'm testifying on behalf of the sponsor for a project at 2918 Mission Street. It's a 75-unit mixed-income project that's in the Mission NCT. This project was first proposed in 2014. We filed formal entitlement applications in January 2016. It was approved by the Planning Commission a little less than 2 months ago on November 30th, 2017, and that was nearly 2 years after entitlement application was filed. This project does involve a lot merger that's over the 100-foot trigger that Mr. Peterson just talked about. While we believe that state law protects the project from zoning changes that are imposed after its entitlement approval, we think a small amendment to the pending legislation adding a grandfathering clause would clarify this point. A grandfathering clause here is also consistent with the board's common practice for pieces of legislation that affect housing projects like 2918 Mission that are approved but haven't started construction yet. For example, this board included provisions in recent legislation related to affordable housing, the Transportation Demand Management Program, and San Francisco's own density bonus ordinance, grandfathering certain aspects of projects, just to name a few. Grandfathering in this narrow instance also recognizes that housing projects that complied with the rules when the project was proposed should not be further delayed or subjected to new requirements after they have received Planning Commission entitlement approval. So with that, we request adding language to the ordinance specifying that the ordinance does not apply to projects that submitted complete development applications before the effective date of this legislation, or even to make it easier, January 1st, 2018. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. We've kind of been following this for a little bit as well. Regarding if it's the 500 or the 50 rather versus the 100-foot merger, honestly, we really actually kind of do defer to the MAP 2020 people. We've been working with them on this in terms of all the ground floor. We just want to make sure that everything second floor and up as it relates to housing is not negatively impacted. And specifically, we can talk about it in the mission, it's BMR housing. And it's a wide range of AMI levels that everybody knows the neighborhood desperately needs, and we just do not want to see anything inhibit our ability to put subsidized affordable housing units on the market as quickly as humanly possible. What happens on the ground floor, they do need to be community serving, and so whether it is restaurants or retail or whatever, we're not going to have an opinion on that. And then specifically related to the comments of the previous speaker as well, this has been a long time conversation in San Francisco about changing the rules, moving the goalposts once everything has already been established. And we would also ask that projects that have already moved through the pipeline and have been approved are not impacted by this. Simple, hopefully straightforward grandfathering amendment would hopefully achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Morning. Peter Papadopoulos, Mission Economic Development Agency. I want to speak in support of this legislation and touch on a few of the important elements I think that are here and how they'll help with the stabilization of Mission Street, which is under an incredible amount of stress right now. I think that limiting these lot mergers is important in terms of keeping things within a scope and scale that is community serving. I think historically we see which of these projects end up being community serving, and the accompanying storefronts, although this legislation not specific to them, plays right into that. I think the addition of adding arts and catering to this corridor is very important, as it will provide significant new opportunities for our displaced arts and cultural groups, as well as for new groups to come in and thrive. And we do have a growing incubator system, especially of community serving catering happening, and this will provide some new homes for them, we hope. In terms of the non-retail professional services, I know we're having discussion about some of the elements of this. All in all, we're certainly in favor of curtailing certain office uses, particularly those that don't lend themselves to be neighborhood serving. All in all, we think that these are strong provisions that will help us to stabilize Mission Street right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Hi, my name is Amy Beinart. I'm legislative aide to Supervisor Hillary Ronen. I'm here today. I came here today actually to speak about the interim controls, but given that there is some conversation now about what's happening with the permanent amendments, I wanted to just weigh in a little bit on those. First of all, Supervisor Ronen is absolutely supportive and sponsored the proposed amendments. The outreach and the discussion that has gone on in preparing these has been has taken some time. We've taken in some data. There has been vetting of the data, and there has been, a result in these proposed amendments. They were introduced at the full board in November, and frankly, hearing about the concerns about the lot mergers today has been a bit of a surprise. I think that any consideration of whether or not there's to be grandfathering shouldn't happen today. The supervisor will take it under advisement, and we will be able to look at what the potential effects are. And if the supervisor wishes to submit an amendment, I'm hoping that she will be able to do that prior to the full board hearing. I think that's all I needed to say about this one. We know that that there are large lots on Mission Street, and the fact that what we're trying to do is to preserve some of the smaller ones, ensure a diversity of scale, both for the housing and for the retail uses, is the reason behind this. Thanks.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Eric Arguello with Cayo 24 Latino Culture District, and we are here in full support of this legislation. We are trying to make sure that these smaller businesses in the Mission, particularly on Mission Street, are able to survive the gentrification that we're having in the neighborhood. There's extreme pressure on these small businesses with rent increases, with investor-type businesses coming into the area, more high-end restaurants coming in. So we want to make sure that the playing ground is even for everyone to be able to stay in business along Mission Street. Mission Street, along with 24th Street, is one of the few places that are left that really cater to low-income, working-class folks in the neighborhood. A lot of the restaurants that have been moving into the area lately are extremely expensive and not affordable for a lot of us. And what we're seeing also with new development coming in is that the spaces below are actually being kept vacant for a long, long time. Developers are not able to rent them out. With particular this development on Mission Street that was spoken about earlier, we did want to work with the developer to get a neighborhood serving type business in that space, but he refused to do it with us on that. So we are looking at preserving smaller spaces, easier to rent out, and with these large developments coming in, they should have smaller spaces at the bottom to be able to cater to the local neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good evening, San Francisco, and everyone else across the world is watching. To say, so I won't get stopped speaking, I support the Mission District and everything they're saying. I wish we had someone other than a black man come to the Fillmore and support us. We don't have no businesses on Fillmore. Or have you seen Fillmore lately? And I'm not here pointing the finger at no one, particularly Queen Bee. I mean, I go to District 5 over there, I can't get no action there because she's playing both parts, and I know all y'all want me to say this, but no, I'm not saying it for y'all. I'm saying it for the sake of the African-American black Negroes, however you want to put us. See, we're getting down to the crucial part. And I hope you hear me, Peskin, because you did a wonderful job on doing that for Justin Herman, because what that did would open up the box where you can't stop. And so this is to the city and county, because they say I'm not a media person. This is a bulletin, news bulletin that's being published. So I am part of the media. And so I don't want no problems tomorrow when I go over there in the chambers and be the only black person that you stop. My name is Ace, damn it. And I'm on a case right here in the city by the bay. I ain't gonna sing because I've been hollering today. I'm trying to get in there to see our acting mayor. I went to her office. I can't get in there because they don't know what the hell's going on. So we, the Western Addition, we're left with nobody. So I'm gonna start acting. I'm the acting supervisor of the 5th District until London Breed do the right damn thing, okay? My name is Ace. You can contact me. I know everything in the Fillmore. When she was a little girl, I was working in the Fillmore. When she was born in the projects, I was working in the Fillmore. And I'm not saying this, London, to get at you like this way, but you need to see me. I'll be in your office in a few minutes. My name is Ace, and I'm on a case. That was a bulletin. That should be published, so that I don't need no press pass tomorrow. You know who I am.
Thank you, Ace. Okay, anybody else wish to comment on item number 3? Seeing none, public comments closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if this is a question for staff or the city attorney, but I just want to double check that the legislative digest, the amendments to current law, in the first sentence, I think that's not correct and doesn't actually explain what the legislation does. I think it's, instead of saying that it would restrict lot mergers by requiring lots along Mission Street to be at least 150 feet wide, I think it's to be no more than 100 feet wide, right?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner, our office and Supervisor Ronan's office submitted a corrected legislative digest to the clerk this morning. Wasn't in the published agenda, but it is in the clerk's file now and will be in the file going forward.
I just wanted the chairman to know that I'm reading all of the fine print.
The chairman appreciates it. Supervisor Tang?
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. I had that same confusion this morning. I did read that as well. So I actually wanted to check in with Supervisor Ronan's office if she has staff here about the grandfathering issue. I'm hearing folks in public comment, and I guess I was a little confused. I think you said that she supports the amendments, but you meant the legislation.
I meant the
overall.
package of, yes.
Got it, okay.
Right. She is not proposing any amendment to this package at this time.
Okay.
The concern about the grandfathering provision, or whether this legislation has a specific effect on that proposed project that's underway, has not been reviewed and vetted, and no decision's been made about any kind of grandfathering provisions.
Okay. I don't know if there's been any reason given in, or only because I talk just generically in terms of land use controls, we tend to grandfather just as a policy, but I'm just curious if there was any sort of rationale behind it.
Had not come up to this point.
Okay, colleagues, seeing no other comments?
The only comment, Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Tang, that I would make is just based on the public comment of the attorney representing the project at 2918, I believe it was, Mission Street. That attorney represented that he believed that they were grandfathered as a matter of law. So if that's true, I would suggest that Council and the Office of the Sponsor have an offline conversation. This is not scheduled as a committee report, so you've got until the 23rd or 24th to have that conversation. Then, so I would say that we not take that amendment and have them have that conversation. And as Council said, he believes that that's operative anyway. So if that is true, then there's no reason to include it, but why don't they have an offline conversation rather than us have it here?
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Peskin. I think would be great to have that dialogue happen and make sure we understand what's going on afterwards. But with that being said, motion by one of my colleagues.
I would move this to the full board with recommendation.
Motion by Supervisor Peskin. We have a second by Supervisor Tang. We can take it without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, we call item 4.
Item number 4 is a resolution imposing interim zoning controls to require CU authorization for proposed restaurant and commercial storefront mergers in the area bounded by 13th, DuBose Division, Mission, Cesar Chavez, and Potrero, and making appropriate findings.
Okay, Hillary Rowan's office is back again.
Amy Beinart, hi. So this is a resolution for interim controls. There were existing interim controls that were in place that were passed by the Planning Commission. The series of those controls meant that while some are expiring after their limit of a 2-year term, there is one interim control in place that has not yet reached its 2-year term, and that is the requirement that spaces that are being converted to restaurant use would have to go through a conditional use authorization process. And so because there is time left on that interim control, and because the need for that interim control remains while the process of reviewing overall retail uses and protections continues, we would like to, the supervisor is proposing to continue that interim control, and has added to that also a conditional use requirement for storefront mergers, not lot mergers, but storefront mergers that would create a space over 2,000 square feet. So these would provide some immediate protection for commercial diversity that we see disappearing on Mission Street, and we would ask for your support in that. I'm happy to answer more questions, but I think to present would be repetitive of the previous item.
Okay. Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 4? Seeing none, public comments now closed. Colleagues, any follow-up?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say we actually instituted permanent controls like this in North Beach years ago, and they have proved remarkably successful, and I'd be more than happy to send this as a committee report for consideration tomorrow at the Board of Supervisors with recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion by Supervisor Peskin as a committee report, and we have a second by Supervisor Tang. We could take it without objection. Madam Clerk, would you call item number 5?
Item number 5 is an ordinance amending the Western Shoreline Area Plan and Local Coastal Program Plan to add an objective to preserve, enhance, and restore the Ocean Beach shoreline and making appropriate findings.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. We have our planning department here to speak on it.
And before we hear from the planning department, I will defer to Supervisor Tang, but I would be happy to co-sponsor this legislation. But it's in Supervisor Tang's district, and I want to thank department staff and particularly for working with the Coastal Commission in such a fashion that, unlike many of the coastal plan, local coastal plan amendments that go to the Coastal Commission that then get rejected and go back to boards of supervisors and city councils, this one is, if we approve it, going to, I should not put words in my 11 Coastal Commission colleagues' mouths, but should be approved unanimously without rejection by the Coastal Commission, hopefully at their February or March meeting.
Thank you. Thank you through the chair. And I do want to thank all the staff who were involved in this particular effort. I know it was a lot of community meetings and so forth. I will say that, just to point out some of the obvious is that we certainly do need this amendment to be able to include issues such as addressing coastal hazards, sea level rise, and so forth that are currently not in there if we didn't do this amendment today. So just in terms of the kind of factually, we know that there are issues that we're going to be contending with, and especially the supervisor who represents a district that borders Ocean Beach. I think it's incredibly important. I have heard a lot of concerns from members of the public, and I'm sure they might come up and say a few words as well, that this has been an effort that has been only led by a few people or a few organizations and so forth. That is completely not what I've seen. I have seen that we have tried as a city to go and have these public meetings. Whether people show up is a whole other issue. I also know that it's a long effort, or it took a while for us to get to this point, and so some people may have forgotten what had transpired maybe a year or 2 or 3 ago. So all that to say that I do think that the staff worked very hard in trying to make this as comprehensive as possible and the best that we can for the city.
Good afternoon, supervisors and Chair Farrell. As Supervisors Peskin and Tang shared, we're here with Western Shoreline Area Plan amendments to address coastal hazards. The Western Shoreline Area Plan is a special area plan in San Francisco because it is our shared local coastal program with the Coastal Commission under the California Coastal Act. And so this is something that it's a state law from the 70s, and then our local coastal program was adopted in 1986. But this is not entirely up to the city because the state retains authority in this area. So different than some other general plan amendments you see. And it governs land use. And ours is primarily public land. So that is a unique local coastal program. We have some residential and commercial parcels, but primarily it's Ocean Beach, the zoo, Lake Merced, the wastewater treatment plant, Golden Gate Park. We have not amended our plan at all since 1986, partly because it is this long process. So this is the first time that we're changing the policies, and coastal hazards are the driver, and that is both current erosion, climate change, and climate change caused sea level rise, and then that sea level rise is predicted to accelerate erosion at the coast. So areas where we already have problems, we will have more problems in the future. You may remember, Supervisor Tang remembers, In winter 2010, we had a severe erosion event where you lost almost 40 horizontal feet of a parking lot in a weekend, basically. That can happen. That led to some emergency measures by the Public Utilities Commission and Public Works, permitted, that are permitted through 2021. Some pieces of parking lots have been removed as they've become unsafe. And there was a large collaborative planning effort led by the city and Spur to figure out the right balance of solutions for our coastal zone. So this amendment does not amend any existing local coastal program policies, doesn't change anything in Golden Gate Park. It just adds a coastal hazards section. And what we're trying to do is preserve, enhance, and restore the Ocean Beach shoreline while protecting public access, scenic quality, natural resources, critical public infrastructure, and existing development from coastal hazards. And there's 6 policies within that, some of which are focused on the sort of near-term managed retreat plan for south of Slope Boulevard, and some of which are long-term planning standards for the whole coastal zone, because sea level rise and erosion are problems that we will continue to deal with forever. So it gives us both some near-term projects and some long-term priorities for how we want to handle this as a city. This has been a multi-year process that was sponsored by a generous grant from the Ocean Protection Council and the Coastal Commission. And so from the project launch through some data and modeling work into policy development, and then we've spent the last year or so going through local approval. There was both a community advisory group for this process and an interagency advisory group because, again, there's extensive public lands, both city and federal, in this area. So we had 3 public meetings plus visits to community groups. We had 4 community advisory group meetings, 5 interagency meetings. We've met, I actually think it's 9 times now with Coastal Commission staff to try and make sure, as Supervisor Peskin noted, when we submit this for certification, we all understand what the proposed amendments are. It's had both an informational and initiation and adoption hearings at the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission voted to initiate 7-0 and then 6-0 for recommended adoption in October of last year. We're now at the board, and then pending local approval, we will submit to the Coastal Commission for certification. As Supervisor Peskin noted, if they recommend modifications or reject it, it would have to come back for the whole local approval process starting back at the Planning Commission. I think we've done our best to work through all those problems before you see it, so you don't have to do this twice. That concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any questions or comments at this time? Okay, we'll move on to public comment. Anybody wishes to comment, please step forward. I have 2 speaker cards, Mike Grizzle and Bill McLaughlin. Anybody else? Please come up. Everyone can line up against the far wall. Everyone will have 2 minutes. And first person, whoever it is, come on up. Thanks for being here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Bill McLaughlin. I'm with the Surfrider Foundation San Francisco chapter. I lead the Restore Slope campaign. Surfrider Foundation is a nonprofit organization with the mission to protect and enjoy the world's waves, waters, and beaches through a powerful activist network. One of the primary missions of our local chapter is to preserve and protect Ocean Beach. In general, we support this LCP amendment because it fulfills our mission. It protects Ocean Beach, especially because it's going to lead to a dramatic cleanup and restoration of the beach south of Sloat. We would like to point out that the LCP before you today is important for the long-term survival of Ocean Beach. The shoreline south of Noriega Street is locked into a continual state of long-term erosion, and climate change and sea level rise will only exacerbate this. And it means that ultimately the beach is drowning in the long-term South Ocean Beach. By implementing a managed retreat policy at Sloat for the infrastructure, the city is making 2 very smart moves. The infrastructure is made truly secure by removing it away from the erosion hazard, and at the same time, the beach is going to be preserved for generations. One note, we have a couple of issues in this LCP that are currently being threatened. One relates to the restrictions on new development in the erosion area. Recently, the SF Zoo has built their own science center right atop the bluff at the apex of the Sloat erosion site. So this is a real concern for us. And additionally, the LCP calls for a new parking access for the public, and the Ocean Beach Master Plan had that site located at the end of Armory Drive. And the zoo apparently wants to build their own parking garage in that area also. So we need some help, anything that you folks can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Mike Grizzle. I'm the vice chair for the Surfrider chapter here in San Francisco. Work alongside Bill in more of a leadership type role there. Not to reiterate anything that Bill said, but just want to reiterate our support for the LCP amendment and the use of a managed retreat strategy there at Sloat High Erosion Zone. Also to reiterate Bill's point, it is important that we look at the Ocean Beach Master Plan and where that parking is going to be relocated to at the end of Armory Road as an important place within the master plan, and also troubling that the zoo is looking to, or has already started using that space. So just want to put that out for consideration, something that the Coastal Commission and supervisors should watch in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Doug Schultz. Katie, I've written to you several times, and I really appreciate your responses. I work with Surfrider and my esteemed guests, and agree with everything that they've said with the managed retreat going on south of Sloat and in front of the sewage treatment plant. My concern is that there is a lack of integration with the zoo, what the zoo is doing. There's also a curiosity about the recycled water plans going through. We have yet to hear any information about that, which is occurring in the same location as the managed retreat is going to be going on. Other than that, thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Eileen Bogan, president of Speak, here on my own behalf. At a community meeting on May 2nd of 2017, two issues were brought to staff's attention. One issue is the U.S. Geologic Survey's study on how sand mining in San Francisco Bay is contributing to erosion on the southern portion of Ocean Beach and accretion or buildup on the northern portion of Ocean Beach. The other issue is related to the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. The sanctuary is currently reviewing its management plan. Based on advocacy from Speak, the sanctuary is reviewing the possibility of incorporating the waters off San Francisco into the sanctuary. These waters are currently an exclusionary area and are also known as the Donut Hole. These issues were also brought to the attention of the Planning Commission at its local coastal amendment hearing on October 5th of 2017. The Commission did not acknowledge these issues, but instead voted unanimously to approve it, with Commissioner Johnson recusing herself due to Spur's involvement in this geographic area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public wish to comment on item number 5? Seeing none, public comments now closed. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone who's been very engaged on this issue over the years, who came out to speak at first. So a couple things. I do know that, I heard concerns about the zoo being a partner in all of this and what will happen, especially with the parking situation. I will say that our office is in a lot of communication with the zoo, although Armory Drive was pointed out in the Ocean Beach Master Plan as where the parking alternatives would be, and may not be that place anymore. I do know that in speaking with all the various different agencies, and including Spur, that we haven't settled on anything yet regarding parking. So I think I told Mr. McLaughlin before that it's just not something we have arrived at a solution yet, but it's not to say that we have for sure taken away all the parking yet. So that's still an evolving conversation. We just haven't gotten to the point where we have said, okay, here is a location for the alternative. So I see a huge role for all of you to play in figuring out where the parking situation would be. But I also wanted to distinguish that from the LCP a bit, because those are the project elements that we'll have to work on at a later moment. The Zoo Science Center, my understanding was that it was a temporary spot. However, once the trail is made in that area with the Brecken Park project, potentially there may be some room for a more permanent situation, in which, yes, I'm sure that we would have to consider all the erosion going on in that area. There was a question about the recycled water plant project that is right by the zoo at the corner of kind of Sloat and the Great Highway area. The PUC is a key partner in all of these interagency meetings that have to do with this whole area. So although I don't have the answer for you, we can find a PUC staffer who can provide that response to you about your concerns. So those were just some of the comments I wanted to make in response to the public comment I heard.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Peskin.
I just wanted to thank Ms. Wenger and Mr. Kern, as well as the recently retired counterpart, Nancy Cave, at the Coastal Commission for their work, and look forward to passing this out to the full board as a committee report and then getting to vote on it again at the Coastal Commission.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Colleagues, if no further comments, could I entertain a motion? Can we have this as a committee report?
I will make a motion to send forth this item to the full board with positive recommendation as a committee report.
Okay, motion by Supervisor Tang with a second by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 6?
Item number 6 is a resolution imposing interim zoning controls in the Excelsior Outer Mission NCD and areas in District 11 to require CU authorization for institutional and certain personal services uses and conversion of commercial to residential uses and making appropriate findings.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, we have been joined by our colleague from District 11, Supervisor Safai, who has sponsored this legislation. So, Supervisor Safai, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Farrell. And Happy New Year to you all. It feels like we've been gone for some time. But thank you for taking the time to schedule this today. This is something that originated out of the newly created working group that we started almost a year ago, the Excelsior Outer Mission Working Group. And the purpose of that group was to talk about the revitalization of our commercial corridor primarily, and then secondarily it was put together a larger plan, a neighborhood plan. It started meeting in April, and we've been continuing until May or June of this year, so it will have been a full year plus. The Department of Planning and Office of Economic and Workforce Development have led that effort with about 26 members of the working group, all neighborhood residents from all different walks of life, so we're very happy with that process. This interim zoning controls is meant to complement that effort and put a pause on some of the uses that have been in many ways overly used or abused in some manners. And hopefully by the time that we are well along to putting together our plan, that these zoning controls will have, if this board and this body supports that, will be in place, and then we have the opportunity to come back and adjust later after this 18-month period. But essentially what it would do is require a CU for institutional uses, private community facilities, religious institutions, social service and philanthropic facilities, personal service uses like hair salons, nail salons, and also other uses that aren't necessarily promoting of light retail in the corridor. We've heard from a large cross-section of residents that they've been frustrated by the lack of economic diversity along the commercial corridor. So this is an attempt to put a pause on that. And I've spoken with many of you about some of these issues over the course of the past year. And also to correct for the, during the cannabis process, we had our limit, but that limit was removed, and so we're just asking for that to be expanded for the CU for MCDs as well, and that's something that we talked about, again, with many of you in that process, so that will allow for a CU for all of these uses in conjunction. Essentially, they'll be in there for 18 months, and our planning process then will move toward putting together a final plan. I also have Rachel Tanner here from the Department of Planning that was one of the co-leads on the process, so I'd like her to say a few words about the Excelsior Outer Mission Working Group, and then I'll take any questions if you all have any.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here today just to share a little bit about the work we're doing in the neighborhood. As the supervisor said, we're working with a large group of stakeholders there, about 30 or so, plus other folks who come to think about what the future of the neighborhood is. And so we've been out working with community meetings. We've had a survey. We had almost 1,000 responses. We've been having students out looking at what are the uses that are on the commercial corridor right now, and really just counting up and seeing what the businesses are there, and really thinking about how we can advance the development of the area, how we can continue to support the businesses that are there, the families that work there, that shop there, and make it a place that serves their needs even more. And so when we come back to the Planning Commission and hopefully eventually to the Board of Supervisors, we'll be looking at 4 areas: public realm, mobility, how do people get around the neighborhood, land use and housing, which obviously these interim controls would impact, and also how do we support the existing small businesses and continue to make it a neighborhood where folks can open up shop, be entrepreneurial, and find a way to support their families. I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any, but we're continuing for the next few months, and really has been a robust process of learning what folks want to see and thinking about the strategies that we have as a city. How can we advance towards those goals? And as the supervisor said, I think putting a pause kind of on some of the uses that really have proliferated in the neighborhood could help us to give some breathing room and space so that we're able to bring forward legislation that advances the causes that we find in the neighborhood strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tanner. Also, I just want to add one other point. We also have over the years, we have a group that's been there working with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, the Excelsior Action Group, and they have been working on a lot of these issues over the past 15 years, working with stakeholders, residents, merchants, along with the Excelsior Outer Mission Merchants Group. So there's been a lot of process that's gone into this, and the work that I have done in the community has been about listening, kind of reflecting that desire. Also, there's been behavior that has been not permitted that we're trying to help control for. A lot of uses pop up that are not even permitted uses, and so this is to put an additional eye on that and be clear about what types of uses are desired, but also what types of uses need additional scrutiny. So that's it, colleagues. Hopefully you, if you have any questions, let me know, and then we can move the conversation forward.
Colleagues, any questions at this point in time? Okay, seeing none, we will open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 6? Seeing none, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Safi, any final questions or something you want to bring up, or else should we have a vote on that?
No, I think we're good. I don't need this to be a committee report, by the way. This is fine. We're going to have some more conversations with planning and economic development this week, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. So, colleagues, could I have a motion to move this item forward to the full board? Motion by Supervisor Tang, and we second by Supervisor Peskin. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us today?
That concludes our business for today.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.